What do you know about the secret underwater world of sound? We'll tell you in this episode.
We get some rum and beer, expensive port in a Ranger, so you know we're gonna party till tomorrow.
Hello, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew, and welcome to another episode. This is your host, Dr. Crack and McCrack, and I'm joined today by Dugald Maudsley, a producer for an exciting new documentary about sound in the oceans. How are you doing, Dugald?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. And you told me that you've got a drink prepared for this episode. So what are you tippling on today?
So I got a local brand here. I've got a beer that was brewed in wine country in the Niagara Peninsula called Bench, because there's some amazing wines grown on the bench in Niagara. Anyway, this one's called Bench Lincoln Lager.
And I have a gin and tonic because it's very summery here in DC.
Very cool.
And the gin comes from Founding Farmers, which, if you're in the DC area, you probably know it's a great restaurant that specializes in local produce. And so it's a local distillery. So I'm doing something for the local organic farmers in the area. Well, my liver is doing something.
Good on you. Me too.
So, first of all, Dugald, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How does one get into producing a nature documentary?
You know, it was a long kind of twisting journey to get to this point. I started out in the world of current affairs, actually in New Zealand, then in Australia, where I worked for the Australian ABC for almost a decade. Did international current affairs, went off to a lot of war zones and places like that, doing short documentaries. Then ended up freelancing when we moved back to North America. We ended up in Chicago for 5 years. We were there when 9/11 occurred. And I did a lot of freelancing, kind of longer documentaries. And then eventually we got back to Toronto, Canada, where we are, and started to produce documentaries for the nature of things, which is this amazing television program in Canada, an institution, been on the air for 64 years. They do natural history and science. And so that's basically what led us down that path. And also some great relationships. This documentary was made with co-producer in Bristol, Humblebee Films, who are absolutely great at making this kind of stuff. And we were their partners here in Canada. So they brought the idea to us. We took it to the nature of things. They loved it. And took us almost 3 years from the search for money to the final delivery to broadcasters to make the 3 parts.
I'm from near Bristol myself, and I know there's a huge contingent of nature journalists, documentarians in that area. It's a sort of a great hub in the UK for that.
Yeah, it's an amazing hub, and it's kind of the central point for making natural history films, and they really know what they're doing there. And Humblebee did another series looking at the way animals use color to survive and do different things. So this is kind of a companion series. And, the idea was to put sound first, which is kind of unusual for a natural history, which is really, all about pictures. And so this was, let's flip that on its head. Sure, pictures are important. The documentary is full of beautiful images. But the idea was, let's put sound center stage as opposed to the pictures. And what do we learn about animal behavior that we didn't know before, or that we didn't realize if we do that? And we made some amazing discoveries.
And as we're obviously in an audio medium here, we know how important sound is for science communication. So big fans of that. So as with the Marine Conservation Happy Hour, let's start off with sort of the marine side of sound in the show. So what sort of creatures are you featuring? And is there anything that you think will wow the listeners that, wow, I didn't know that sort of thing?
Well, I would start with the thing that wowed me, which was a fish that sings. Didn't know that. The plain fin midshipman is this toadfish that comes out of the deep, deep ocean in springtime in the Northern Hemisphere, goes into the intertidal zone and basically makes a nest. There are literally thousands of these male fish who build up their little nest to make it really attractive for the female. And then the boys at night start to sing. And they basically produce this extraordinarily loud hum. When they sing as choruses, it can be 110 decibels loud, which is as loud as a lion's roar. And the idea is to attract the ladyfish from the deep ocean get her to come into the intertidal zone. Hopefully, she chooses your nest, not some other dude's, and lays her eggs on the ceiling of the nest. And then what also is interesting is that she then leaves and disappears. And it's the guy who stays there for 3 months, never leaves the nest, guards it, often using sound to scare other animals away, takes himself close to death because he's not eating, and in the end, hopefully raises a brood of plain-finned midshipmen. And what was also interesting is that this fish was, back in the day in San Francisco Bay, people were wondering what this weird humming sound was that they were hearing. And they didn't know. They couldn't figure it out. They thought maybe it was some kind of experiment. Was the Navy doing something? And eventually they realized that it was the plain-finned midshipman that had come into the bay and was there to nest and whatnot. But it took a while to figure that out because that sound is so loud, it can actually, you can hear it above water as well.
Yeah, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the sound of mating fish causing people to phone up the police in Tampa because this low frequency sound was traveling through the ground and then up through people's walls and making dogs bark and so forth.
Yeah. Well, that's like the plain-finned midshipman. It was a big mystery for a long time. And anyway, we filmed that fish. I thought that was extraordinary that there's a fish that hums and this kind of, reverse household situation that takes place. Very amazing fish, not easy to film. A lot of its behavior takes place at night. So we had geared ourselves up. We brought lights in actually from the UK and special lights for underwater. And we had hydrophones to be able to pick up the sound. And it turned out that they did a lot of the behavior that we thought was going to be at night. We were able to capture during the day. But it took our crew a couple of goes. They went back for 2 seasons to capture all of the behaviors, very patiently sitting in the water to gather them. And our sound recorders who came from Toronto had to basically get up at like 3 a.m. when the water was the calmest, convince that poor director of photography to row them out into the middle of the bay and drop the hydrophone down in. And as you probably know, any lapping of waves against the boat, any movement of waves, like it all gets picked up by these very sensitive microphones. Yes. So they had a hell of a time, trying to get the perfect conditions to be able to capture both a single midshipman singing, but also the chorus.
Now, the chorus of the midshipman, it sounds like they're trying to attract their mates by basically doing a massive a cappella chorus, which may give some listeners some hope out there, being good at a cappella, you could attract a mate.
Maybe you want to get together with your buddies. Yeah, I mean, it's what does it. And, that sound has to travel over a long distance. And one of the great researchers in the field, Andy Bass, basically told us it's like a sonic highway. They're really laying down this sound highway, and the female literally latches onto it and then just follows it all the way into the area where these guys are humming. So to me, I was kind of blown away by that. And, from a filming perspective, it wasn't easy to get, but we've got a great scene which kind of captures all of those behaviors. We have 2 different versions. We get a British version and a Canadian version. In the British version, they had a bit more time. So they also looked at the way that the midshipman has to struggle to survive when the tide goes out. And midshipmen also are amazing because they can breathe, when there's no water around them for enough time that the tide comes back in. There's basically heron and there's bald eagles that love tasty midshipmen. So it's a pretty perilous 3 months of their lives.
You mentioned that they chase off predators by making sound. Is it a similar sound to the courtship sound, or is it different?
Oh, quite different. It's almost a bark. It's a grunt.
Yeah.
And so crabs are a big problem, right? They come along and they want to eat these eggs, and the midshipman kind of fills in the doorway of its little underwater cave and literally launches itself out towards the crab and then does this grunt or bark, which eventually, in the case of what we filmed, eventually will cause the crab to bugger off because it's just, it's not going to get by this guy. And the midshipmen do look very fierce. I mean, they're toadfish. They're very attractive looking fish. But anyway, they get the girl and they also manage to, keep the eggs safe.
So they're like a loud bulldog or something like that in terms of appearance. Ugly, but
fearsome.
Very barky. So, in the marine environment, what other species did you manage to capture as well? Now, obviously, whales are one that people automatically think of in terms of sound in the oceans, particularly the humpback whales.
Yeah.
So, did you get any unusual whales or species that hadn't been recorded before?
The whales were very difficult. They're really hard to film in many ways. And we went down that pathway, but it just wasn't working out. Instead, we decided to focus on a couple of other species. One, of course, was the dolphin, which is also extremely popular. And what was interesting about the dolphin for us was that it does communicate across these really immense frequencies, some of which we can hear, the clicks, the human ear can pick up and we can record. But some of the other stuff is at the 200,000 hertz range, which is about 10 times what we can hear. And what was amazing with the dolphins is that they're actually chasing after fish that hide under the sand. So they have to figure out where these fish are. And of course, when the dolphins come in, they're usually making a fair amount of noise. The fish immediately scatter, get under the sand. There's nothing around. And the dolphins basically send out their clicks and get the echo coming back. So it's echolocation and kind of like a bat, but underwater. And they're able to figure out exactly where these fish are hiding and capture them. But the other thing they do is they also sort of dive down and they spin around to get the right side of their brain closest to the sand, because it turns out the right side of the brain is best at picking up that sound coming back. And when they do this move, they go up to that really high 200,000 hertz. And again, it just allows them to get a much finer view of where those animals are. And then they dive headfirst into the sand and come up with these worms and other creatures that they're hunting. So it's an extraordinary use of sound, not to communicate, which is how we often think of dolphins, but this is like, how do I hunt? How do I find my dinner? Which is, doing its best to hide from me. And watching them do that and capturing that behavior was pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting because I think we've mentioned before on this show that dolphins don't actually really sort of hear sound through their ears like we would, because sound is traveling so fast underwater. They actually pick it up through the bones of their skull and the fats in their jaw.
Yeah.
So sort of lying down on the side, using the sort of the side of their face as a sound receiver actually makes a lot of sense if you want to pick up something that's kind of fine scales, like using a metal detector, an acoustic metal detector.
Yeah, they've got this melon, it's called, and that's the place where they're picking up a lot of the rebounding sound. And that right side of the brain is just better at processing information. So that's the part of the brain that they want, because I would assume that they're doing some pretty amazingly complicated and fast calculations to try to figure out what the heck's going on. And they're swimming at the same time, right? They're moving forward at speed and they're trying to figure out where these fish are underneath the sand. So it's a pretty extraordinary thing. And they all hunt separately. They need about 15 kilos of fish a day. So they actually have to do a fair amount of hunting to fill their bellies. And each of them kind of heads off in their own direction to do their hunting on their own. So it's again quite a sight, and that was one of the reasons why we focused on them. This is sort of a unique use of sound to hunt.
I used to work on a dolphin species, the Indo-Pacific humpback dolphin. They used to focus on fish called croakers, which they probably were listening out for the sounds that the fish were making and trying to detect them that way. So do you have any other noisy fish species?
Well, we did, and this was the clownfish, the Finding Nemo fish that Disney made famous. And what's interesting about the clownfish is that it took us underwater and to the realization that we think as humans that how could there be a lot of sound under there? But there's an intense amount of sound underwater. There's fish that are grunting. There's fish that are groaning. There's fish that are cleaning coral. There are fish that are clicking, their calipers and all sorts of things. It's actually a very, very lively environment. And the clownfish has to use sound in a really unique way in order to get through that first bit of life. And what we were interested in not only was the way the clownfish did this, but the way that biologists are using that kind of biological mechanism to actually help regenerate reefs. And so with the clownfish, it was these clownfish get born. They then are swept out into the ocean because it's a safer place to be than trying to grow up on the reef where there's lots of predators. It only takes about 10 days for them to get big enough to make their way back in again. But what brings them back to the reef is that noise.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're listening for is a healthy reef. And as we discovered, a healthy reef is a noisy reef. Okay, that's really cool. So basically, these little fry that are about the size of a piece of rice are finding their way back onto the reef from often kilometers away. And they're thinking, okay, where am I going to settle? Well, I'm going to settle where it's the noisiest. So we watched that whole process of the fry being born and then being swept out, coming back, and choosing that location to live. But again, it was because we wanted to focus on these scientists in Australia who were doing this really cool work to take that knowledge and somehow figure out, well, how do we help these reefs that are being, fried by warm water, climate change driven water? So we did that too.
Oh, sounds kind of cool to have concerts to bring larvae in to help settle on the reef during these trying climatic times. Now, underwater isn't the only environment that is being featured in the documentary. So could you give us a snippet of some of the terrestrial sounds that you've been recording?
Yeah, so there were 3 episodes. The first one is Hunters and Hunted. It's about, how do you find a meal? How do you avoid becoming a meal? And there's some amazing creatures in there, including the big ones like the lion and the hyena. And what was cool about that is that the hyena is often trying to grab a free meal off the lions after they get it. But what we didn't realize was that this is all being done in the pitch dark, so they can't actually really see each other, and so they're entirely using sound to try to grab the meal, and the lions are using that sound to try to fight off the hyenas. And so that was kind of crazy. The other really cool one in that episode was the great gray owl, which we filmed here in Canada, that has to find its prey under about, up to a meter of snow, punch through that snow and capture it without ever seeing it. And, the owl is amazing at silent flight, but it's also amazing at overcoming the impact that snow has on sound. And that was what I didn't understand, is that snow, of course, dampens sound, which we're all used to. You go on a snowy day, everything sort of seems kind of silent and quiet. It's muffled. And the other thing that snow does is it refracts sound, it bounces it. So if the owl were to actually go for the place where it initially hears the sound, it would miss its prey, because the prey is not actually there. It's often, up to 23 centimeters away from that.
Oh, so a little bit like an osprey going for a fish, but the fish is actually somewhere else because of the refraction. Yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Water is doing to light what snow is doing to sound. And so we had a couple of scientists, one from Canada, one from Southern California, that actually figured this out. Like, for scientists, it's been a bit of a mystery. How is the owl actually finding its prey under the snow? And they came up to Manitoba in Canada in the middle of the winter and used this amazing acoustic camera, which has about 60 microphones and a tiny little video camera in the middle. And what it does is, in industry, it helps people find leaks that you can hear, but you can't see. So you don't exactly know where they are. Well, it visualizes where the sound is coming from. So the scientists used the camera in the same way. They were able to visualize where this little tiny vole was under the snow, and then what was happening to the sound. And they figured out that the owl has to come in, and the way that it gets over, the way that refraction and dampening happens, is it gets right above its prey. And at that point, those 2 effects are the least. And that's where it makes its final decision, and then it plunges. So that whole kind of process of how the owl captures the actual vole was never really understood. So that's another element that we had. And we, at the end of each episode, we did a behind the scenes where we followed the scientists and showed you how we figured out what the owl was up to.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating and fabulous. Now, I've got 2 more questions for you. So first of all, what was the biggest nightmare putting this show together? And secondly, on the positive side, what was the biggest wow moment?
I think the biggest challenge is just being able to capture the behavior, find this thing. So a really good example is here in Canada, we filmed wolves in Algonquin Park. And there's not that many wolves out there, and they only come out at night. So we brought a conservationist on board who knows that area, and he and his partner traveled about 15,000 kilometers by car and by foot over 30 days to keep finding these wolves for us, and then radioing into our to our director of photography, who happens to live near the park, which is one of the reasons why we chose it. He would then drive in, dump the car, almost crawl his way into the bush because they spook so easily, and try to capture the behavior. So we had at least 30 days of searching for wolves over on and off, and about another 30 days of filming them. So it was really difficult, and that's to get 5 minutes of storytelling. So that was a bit of a nightmare, and both our conservationist was sleep deprived by the end of it, and so was our poor director of photography, not getting any sleep, trying to capture these wolves. So that was crazy.
This is definitely something that the audience doesn't realize where they see this amazing footage. They haven't seen the poor photographer who's been stuck in a hedge in the pouring rain for weeks upon end to get that 30 seconds of footage.
Yeah, and Hugo Kitching, our director of photography in this situation, not only captured all of the wolves, but he managed to capture a black bear, which is one of the few animals that will kill a pup. And it was the pups who were in the area that we were filming. They were in these rendezvous sites because they're too big for the den, but they're too inexperienced to go out hunting. And so a black bear wandered in because he'd heard these pups howling. They're trying to figure out how to, they're learning how to howl, and they attracted it. Luckily, it was a mama bear, and she had a baby bear elsewhere who called out and kind of diverted her. So he did an amazing job, as you say, literally wedging himself into trees and behind shrubbery as he tried to film these darn wolves.
So the biggest wow moments that you had, the biggest success, apart from actually finding the animals you're trying to track down?
Well, I think in a way, one of the biggest, there's a big picture success, which was that Humblebee Films put together it's an extraordinary soundtrack. And for people who love sound, it is an amazing feast. Like, you can just sit and not even look at the pictures and just listen to this amazing soundtrack that they put together. One of the animals that I thought was really cool and really difficult to get was this tiny little tree hopper, which is the size of a dime. And, for me, a wow moment was, there are 200,000 species out there that we can't even hear as human beings. That's more species than we can hear. And so we realized that there's this whole kind of secret world or hidden world, which is one of the reasons we called the series what we did. And to be able to get inside that world using another cool piece of technology called a vibrometer. And it picks up vibrations. And we're told that it was used for spying, that you can actually aim it at the window, of the Soviet embassy.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
It picks up the vibrations of a conversation, amplifies them. We never got anybody to confirm that for us. Anyway, we used it for a much more interesting purpose, which was we were able to pick up the vibrations of the tree hopper. They vibrate their abdomen. And when you take that sound and amplify it, every tree hopper sounds different. So we had one tree hopper that sounded like an owl laughing at a joke. We had another one that sounded like a car beeping. It was like, these were crazy, crazy sounds. And yet we never heard them before. So to me, translating that sound, making it hearable to our ears, then realizing that this little tree hopper has to duet with a female to find it during mating season on this plant. She sings one type of song, he sings a different one, and they kind of close in on each other, or he closes in on her. That was really fascinating to me. And because it took us into this hidden world that I didn't really know existed, it was a big wow moment for me.
So these little tree hoppers are kind of doing the equivalent of Grease Summer Nights, that's really dating me, but the female bit, the male bit, and getting closer and closer together.
It is exactly like that. Yep. Singing their hearts out, trying to, convince each other that this is a good thing. And I'm over here, come over here. Our little tree hopper, I won't give it away. If people want to watch it, you'll see whether the tree hopper was successful or not, because the female is not just communicating with one male. She's communicating with whoever is on that plant. So there's a bit of a horse race to get there. And the first guy to arrive on the scene is the one that's going to get the girl. So it's fun, that one, for sure.
So with those tree hoppers, it's the first one to start singing, but do you have any species where it's maybe the quality of the song? Have you found anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. We filmed in Australia with the superb lyrebird.
Oh, yes.
An amazing, extraordinary mimic. And the thing about the lyrebird is it can imitate up to 25 other birds.
Mm-hmm.
And the female is interested in the quality of those imitations. If the male does a good job, that shows, that this is going to be a good mate, a strong mate, one that will have good genes to pass on. And so the female is really very picky. She's listening not only for that, but also for the kind of dance, because the superb lyrebird also does a fantastic dance. But because their habitat is being encroached upon by us, the superb lyrebird is losing, access to other sounds that it needs in order to attract a mate. And so it's starting to use man-made sounds. So the lyrebird that we focused on did an amazing car alarm, a very freaky sounding baby crying. So, and I can't remember, there's a third one that we picked up that was, it was a camera clicking. So,
oh yes, yeah.
And they are really spot on.
I heard that there was a lyrebird who was near someone who was a big Star Wars fan and does R2-D2 sounds and spaceship sounds.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of scary. Like the baby crying one was like, ooh, that's just like a bit weird. But this is what it has to do. Like it's the quality of that imitation that the female is looking for and making her judgment call on.
So the lyrebird really is like the Hugh Jackman maybe of the bird. Well, not only Australian, but they can sing, they can dance, they can
That's
act.
right. the triple threat of the animal world. Yeah, that's the lyrebird. I think Hugh Jackman would love that comparison.
Well, if he needs a narrator in Australia, maybe you should approach.
Maybe. That's great.
Well, that sounds absolutely fabulous, and also gives some of the theatre geeks out there a bit of hope. So where can people tune into this show? You said it's in Canada, it's in the UK. Which channels to tune into?
Yeah, so in the UK, look for it on Sky TV. I know it's a subscription channel, but that's where it's available in the UK. In Canada, you can watch it on CBC Gem, which is the CBC's free platform, digital platform, will be there for quite some time. And it's also going to eventually be coming out on Netflix. I don't know why, but we are told maybe it won't be till this summer, but really Netflix is going to show it in the rest of the world. So other than the UK and Canada, you can find it on Netflix everywhere else in the world. We're told at this stage around the summer. So yeah, those are the main broadcasters that were involved in the financing of the film and the making of it.
Great. So our listeners who are tuning in from some of the more exotic places like Bhutan and Sri Lanka and so forth, you'll be able to find it on Netflix. No worries.
That's right. Exactly.
And when does it premiere? What's the premiere date?
So the premieres happen both in the UK and in Canada. We went to air in February, as did Sky. So that's why here it's moved across to the digital platform. And then Netflix, the moment they're keeping their premiere date a little bit under wraps, but we hope it's not going to be too far. They've got it. It's ready to go. So it's really up to them.
Excellent. So everyone keep your eyes open for Netflix around the world for The Secret World of Sound.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Dugald. It's been an absolutely pleasure chatting to you about this documentary. Certainly going to tune in. And as a big acoustics nerd myself, this is absolutely up my alley. And I know a lot of listeners will be very interested as well.
Super.
And thank you very much, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew, for tuning in.
Hey, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew, don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us for future episodes. And also, refer us. We'd love it. We would also like to hear from you, so please contact us on social media, or you can email us about a topic that you're interested in hearing about. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, or you would like us to come visit your science facility and do a live episode, email us at info@absolutelysmashingllc.com. This podcast was edited and produced by Absolutely Smashing. The music is produced by Jolly Shore Leave. Thank you again for listening, and we couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew.